The obstetrics clinic on Whitaker Street smelled faintly of lemon cleanser and burnt coffee. I sat beside my daughter-in-law Aubrey, watching her smooth the hem of her dress over a gentle curve that had turned our family's talk tender and bright. My son Caleb was traveling again 2 weeks on a contract in Texas, so I'd offered to come along for the final check before the baby arrived. I told myself it would be an ordinary morning, a grainy picture, a steady heartbeat, a photograph for the refrigerator. Inside the dim exam room, the ultrasound monitor cast a pale light. Dr. Nolan Pierce moved the transducer in patient arcs, measuring quietly, clicking the mouse from time to time. His brow tightened by degrees like a door easing toward a latch. I leaned forward, ready to hear the usual reassurances. The baby looks great, you're right on track, but his eyes did not settle on mine. Mrs. Elena Parks, he said softly. May I speak with you in the hall? The hallway was cool and too bright. He kept his voice professional, each word precisely placed. The biometric measurements are clear about gestational age. Based on the dates I have, your son could not be the biological father. Something inside me went weightless, then dropped hard as if the floor had changed levels without warning. I don't understand. He paused. You may wish to advise him to seek independent counsel. I'm sorry. For a moment, I steadied myself against the wall and stared through the door's small window. Aubrey was still on the table, one hand on her stomach, smiling at the moving gray flicker. I went back in with a practiced face, the one mothers put on when the room needs calm, and asked kind questions about vitamins and rest as though my ears weren't ringing. By the time I reached the parking lot, memories were crowding me with the efficiency of a tide. At 22, I had married Victor Parks, a man who could hold a room with a story and a handshake. He spoke of ambition as if it were property already in escrow. I brought a sensible inheritance and a stubborn work ethic to the marriage. Savannah brought its old houses with peeling paint and good bones. We bought a duplex off Habersham with my money and mostly my labor. Victor loved to tell neighbors we were building a portfolio. I was the one on a ladder, the one in city offices at 7 a.m., learning which form unlocked which permit. Years piled up like ledger's rent rolls balanced on my kitchen table, paint under my nails, a casserole cooling while I returned a contractor's call. Caleb was the bright fact of those years. Victor was often elsewhere, closing something that didn't show up in our accounts. When I questioned the gaps receipts that didn't square explanations that arrived too smooth, he called me dramatic, then suspicious, then paranoid. It is a quiet thing the way doubt becomes a room you live in. When Caleb brought Aubrey to dinner for the first time, the room changed. She had a careful smile and a voice that made ordinary greetings sound warm. She offered to learn the property business, not out of impatience, she said, but because she wanted to understand how our family had been built. I started her with small things, the color-coded calendar for routine maintenance, the vendor spreadsheet, the rent deposit checklist. She learned quickly and thanked me as if I had handed her more than information. Later, over tea, she told me childhood had been a series of temporary addresses. I prayed for a family that kept the porch light on, she said, eyes bright with earnestness. I made space for her in small ways, a recipe card, a string of freshwater pearls that had belonged to my mother, a key to the supply cabinet at the office. The day she called me second mom, something in me unclenched. Standing now by my car with the doctor's words circling like gulls above the river, I felt that loosened place go tense again. I tried to replay the past few months in plain light without romance. Aubrey had been so eager to belong that belonging's heirlooms password stories had passed easily across the table. I had been so grateful for company that I didn't audit the exchange. Perhaps that is how trust works. At first it moves without a receipt. I drove home along Victory Drive and told no one what Dr. Pierce had said. The family photos on the hallway wall looked level, but the house felt subtly tilted as if the joists had taken a hidden shift. I made dinner, wiped the counters, and set the kettle to boil, performing each task with the steadiness of someone proving a point to herself. Later, alone at my desk, I opened a clean notebook and wrote down dates, Caleb's flights, Aubrey's appointments, my own list of questions. The pen left a dark, even line. I did not plan a confrontation. Not yet. I have spent a lifetime restoring structures that other people thought were past saving. Before you decide whether to tear out a wall, you find the studs. You map the load-bearing lines. You stand very still and listen for where the weight truly sits. I did not sleep much that night. The kettle hissed, went quiet, hissed again. I drank tea that cooled, untouched, beside my ledger, turned pages that had no answers on them, wrote the same 3 dates twice as if the ink might argue with arithmetic. By midnight, I had a plan that wasn't a plan so much as a posture proceed, as though nothing were wrong. Observe as though everything depended on it. The next morning, I began with the simplest thing, time. I pulled Caleb's travel folder from the drawer in my desk, where I keep warranties and our dog's veterinary records. He is meticulous about sending me itineraries, a courtesy, born of all the youth group trips and debate tournaments I drove him to when he was a boy. There it was, the confirmation for the Austin contract, boarding passes, the hotel invoice that listed a check-in under his name while I was watching the azaleas bloom. I copied them on the old brother printer, slid the duplicates into a fresh manila folder marked in my square handwriting, Austin dates. On a separate sheet, I wrote the window Dr. Nolan Pierce had indicated the measurements that were as unemotional as a ruler. The numbers did not touch. No matter how I angled them, the edges would not meet. I turned to Aubrey's calendar, the one she kept on a soft green notepad beside my office phone. Appointments noted in a rounder, happier script: prenatal vitamins, glucose test, ask Elena about vendor keys. I felt the small bruise of that smiley face. I ran my finger down the column until I reached the week that mattered. She had been in town. She had attended a tenants' meeting with me. She had baked lemon squares and left them cooling in my kitchen. The ordinariness of those days felt like a trick, like a magician palming a coin while inviting you to look at his other hand. On Victor's side of the closet, I found what I knew I would find: receipts folded in quarters pushed deep into the pocket of a sports coat he wore only when he thought someone might be watching. One was for a late dinner at a restaurant that prefers to keep the music low and the lights flattering. Another for a small boutique on Broughton Street where clerks know my name and the fact that I do not care for bangles because they clack against the file cabinet. The charge was not for me, and the clerk's handwriting at the bottom: "Will box it beautifully," turned the paper into something almost alive. I did not cry. I set each slip flat, smoothed the creases with my thumb, and photocopied them onto a single page labeled River and Bouton Victor. You cannot measure perfume with a ruler, but you can keep its witness on a page. I am not naive about people or about paper. I have spent my adult life learning which documents can be made to tell the truth and which will lie on behalf of anyone holding them. Years ago, when my father's hands had begun to tremble over breakfast, and he saw how I made more lists than meals, he suggested I put the properties into a living trust. "Not because you don't love him," he said of Victor, "but because structure is kinder than sentiment when storms come." I followed his advice. I drew up the trust, named myself trustee, tucked the binder's deeds, schedules of beneficial interest tax receipts, behind the cleaners in a cupboard no one but me opens. It is an unromantic place to keep romance safe, but romance has a history of not returning the favor. I did not announce that memory to anyone. Instead, I announced something else. After breakfast, I told Victor I needed a week of quiet to finish preparing for the spring inspections. "I'll work from the Isle of Hope," I said, as if the decision were a matter of ambiance. He looked relieved that I would be gone before he had to invent reasons for being elsewhere. "Take your time," he said, and kissed the air near my temple. He did not ask why I needed a key to the carriage house's side closet, or why I carried ledgers to my car under a blanket like casseroles for a funeral. The carriage house sits under live oaks that know more than they tell, the kind of place where a person can return to herself without announcing it. The paint is a hopeful yellow. The floorboards carry the faint complaint of old wood in the evening. I set up the card table I keep for emergency craft projects, arranged the folders in a fan so I could see the tabs: Austin River and Boughton Trust Master, and placed a cheap lockbox at my feet. I made copies of copies, not because paper is holy, but because bureaucracy respects weight, and few things weigh more in a room than stacks arranged by a woman who knows exactly what page she will open to if someone insults her. The second step was discretion. I did not tell Caleb I was moving out for a few days. I did not tell Aubrey I would be less available to show her the difference between an air handler's service log and a maintenance invoice. I told Britt, my bookkeeper, to email me PDFs instead of placing the printed packets on my office chair. "Trying to save a few trees," I joked. She laughed. She lives in a craftsman bungalow with 4 compost bins. At night, I kept my phone face down and the ring low. The oaks whispered. A tugboat sighed on the river. I waited. By the third day, I understood that waiting has 2 speeds: one sprinting in your chest, one crawling in your bones. I needed someone whose profession is patience, whose curiosity is legalized. I drove to a diner off Skidaway, the kind with coffee that tastes like the color brown, and a waitress who calls you sugar without trying to own the word. I had asked Adrian Knox to meet me there because a man with his skill should not be seen anywhere that advertises itself as discreet. Adrian is not the kind of investigator television imagines. He has the posture of a high school science teacher and the shoes of someone who stands all day without complaint. When I slid the Austin folder across to him, he did not offer condolences or commentary. He read. When I slid the receipts, he read those too. "You're thorough," he said, which is as high a compliment as I will accept on a weekday. "I need facts," I said. "Not rumors, not stories people tell to be interesting at a party. I need times and places and who paid the bill." "Understood." He opened a small notebook and wrote 3 tidy bullets. "Do I have your permission to follow, to photograph, to access publicly available records and reports?" Anything that requires a court order, I'll ask before I breathe in that direction. You have my permission to find what is there, I said, and to leave anything you have to invent exactly where it belongs. He nodded. We discussed fees which were not small and scope which was smaller than my fear would have preferred. Patterns first, he said, then proof. Patterns are what you suspect. Proof is what the judge will let me say aloud. I left him with copies. He left me with an odd comfort that had nothing to do with optimism. Competence can feel like mercy when you have gone too long without it. I had one more stop and no appetite for it. Lila Moreno keeps her office in a brick building that used to be a doctor's practice and still smells faintly of alcohol swabs and dry paper. I hired her years ago to draft a lease that would not blow down in a breeze. She is the kind of attorney who will tell you what you want when you actually want the opposite. Elena, she said when I sat, tell me why your eyes are quiet but your hands are not. I told her. Not every detail, this is one of the ways I keep myself human, but enough of the structure that she could see what kind of beam was failing. She asked for the trust binder. I placed it between us like a proof of life. She paged through and made the tiniest approving sound a person can make. You did this right, she said. Don't apologize for it. I'm not apologizing, I said. I'm reminding myself I did something right on purpose. We spoke about George's version of fairness, which is to say, how the law pretends to be math about marriage. She asked whether I had signed anything recently that could complicate the path back to my own work. I had not. She cautioned me against confessing even true things to anyone who might enjoy repeating them. You're thinking of confrontation, she said. I'm thinking of framing, I answered. What goes up first? What can wait? Where to anchor the load? She smiled. Then the advice is the same advice I give Carpenter's document. Do not disturb until you have the supports in, and for heaven's sake do not sign something because it looks friendly. I was about to say that I knew better than to make friends with paper when my phone buzzed. Caleb. I let it go to voicemail and immediately hated myself for the cowardice of that mercy. I excused myself to the hall and called him back. Mom, he said without preamble, Aubrey and I are going crazy with appointments. She's tired and I'm behind on invoices. She had an idea that might help, and I wanted to run it by you because you're the only person I know who can smell a bad form from a hallway away. What kind of idea, I asked, though I already knew the flavor of it. A durable power of attorney. Just so she can help manage things if anything happens. You know, if I'm traveling or if there's a surprise, it wouldn't be forever. It's just she's trying, Mom. I closed my eyes without meaning to. Bring the document, I said. Today. Don't sign it until we look at it together. He arrived at the carriage house in the early afternoon, shoulder square and mouth tight with the effort of being fair. The oaks threw shade on his face the way they used to when he was a boy, hiding from July. Aubrey was not with him. I read that as a kindness and a strategy and didn't choose between them. He handed me a packet clipped together with a cheerful binder clip. The top page had the words, Durable Power of Attorney, in a font that tries too hard to look like it knows what it's doing. I read slowly. I have learned that reading slowly can be a kind of prayer. There it was, authority to transact in banking and financial matters. Authority to enter contracts including those involving real property. Authority to manage, settle, and compromise claims. Authority so general that if you took a black marker to the nouns, the verbs themselves would still make a person uneasy. No mention of limits, no expiration date, no requirement for dual signatures or witness by anyone not already in the room. Caleb, I said calmly, what do you think this allows? Just help. If something happened? He cleared his throat. Aubrey's been saying we should streamline things. That it's old-fashioned to have to email you for every approval. She says you're exhausted. I am tired, I admitted, but not so tired that I will sleep through a theft. He flinched. Mom, I didn't say her theft, I said softly. I said a theft. Son, if I handed you a blank check and said it was for groceries, you'd think I'd lost my mind. This is a blank check with nicer font. I tapped the margin. If you trust your wife, and I hope you do, then show her you trust her by insisting on clarity. People who love you do not ask you to choose between love and good paperwork. He sat back, the fight going out of his forehead. She's going to be hurt. Then be tender and firm at the same time, I said. Say no to this version and yes to a version that names exactly what help looks like: medical decisions if you are incapacitated. Access to the joint checking account with a cap. Nothing touching the trust, nothing touching titles. I placed the packet on the table between us. Tell her your mother insisted because your mother is old-fashioned about signatures and very modern about consequences. He looked at me for a long time the way people look at bridges when they are deciding whether to cross. Are you angry with her? He asked quietly. I am careful around her, I said, the truth moving gently through my mouth. And I'm asking you to be careful around paper. He nodded, folded the packet, and slid it back into his bag. He stood, then didn't, then stood again. At the door, he hesitated. "You always taught me that belonging is a thing we build," he said. "I'm just trying to build it in a hurry." "I know," I answered. "That's how we make crooked walls. Slow down." After he left, I pressed my palms to the cool formica and waited for the tremor in my hands to declare itself. It did not. The quiet came like a permission. I wrote 2 more labels, POA blank check and Caleb conversation. If you name a thing plainly, it is less likely to hide. The days that followed were a study in the discipline of ordinary life. I answered tenant emails about a dripping faucet and a neighbor who played drums after 10. I approved an invoice for pest control and declined one for a landscaping plan that cost as much as a used car. I texted Aubrey to ask how she felt after her glucose test and sent her a link to the lemon ginger tea I keep in the bottom drawer. The surface of our lives remained smooth enough to skate on. Under that surface, the slow churn of other people's schedules continued. Adrian sent brief messages, pattern developing. More soon. And records request filed. And once a photo of a storefront with the instructions, "Do not share." The discipline of silence is not always an absence of sound. It is the sound of you choosing what not to say. One evening, Victor came by the carriage house with a bag of groceries, as if he were starring in an advertisement for domestic generosity. He set down milk coffee, 2 limes, and funnier than he knew, a bouquet of hydrangeas wrapped in tissue, the color of blush. "Thought you might want something fresh," he said. "I have everything I need," I answered, which was true in more ways than one. He looked around as if the room might reveal what I had been doing there in the space where he was not. He did not linger, which used to hurt and now assisted. After he left, I pulled the Trustmaster binder from the shelf and for the first time in months read it not as a builder but as a beneficiary. There was my father's signature witnessing mine. There were the schedules listing each parcel and unit, and the tiny line where improvements could be noted. New roof, 2015. HVAC, 2019. Footnotes in the story of how one woman turned stubbornness into shelter. I slid in a fresh page at the back and wrote in block letters, Amendment CLM for language. I would see Lila again and ask about a clause I could add that would make it easier to reward fidelity and harder to monetize betrayal. You can't legislate love, but you can require 2 signatures before the check clears. By the week's end, the oaks had shaken off a rash of pollen, and the air had that washed feeling Savannah gets after rain when the whole city smells lightly of salt and chalk. I drove the long way back to Victory Drive past the houses where people have either figured out how to live together or figured out how to hide that they have not. The front porch light was on. Aubrey was on the sofa with her feet tucked under her and a blanket a friend had knitted draped over her knees, a faint tiredness across her face, the way fine dust settles on a windowsill. Victor was working in his study, which meant playing at importance with a phone call that would produce a story and no deposit. Mom Aubrey called this word soft with the ease of it. She stood, then sat again the way women do when grace and gravity have to negotiate with one another. "How was Isle of Hope? Did you get through the inspection checklists?" "I did," I said and hung up my jacket. "And I brought you more tea." I placed the tin on the coffee table. She smiled and reached for my hand as if nothing in the world could ever make hands clumsy. I let her hold it. I did not pull away. Care looks the same from the outside, whether it is the kind you give or the kind you keep for yourself. She told me about a podcast on nurseries with colors that don't exhaust babies. I asked about the paint in their second bedroom and whether she had found the fixture I like that doesn't glare. We spoke about the ordinary. Ordinary is how you build a house strong enough to hold what is not. When I went to bed, I placed my notebook on the nightstand and drew a simple diagram before I turned off the light. On one side, I wrote evidence. On the other, I wrote assumption. Under evidence, I listed Austin dates, doctor's measurements, receipts, POA draft, Victor's absences, Aubrey's access. Under assumption, I left a blank space and underlined it. I do not trust assumptions. They are persuasive liars. The last thing I did before sleep, took me without permission, was whisper the sentence my father used to whisper when a storm crossed the river and we were waiting to see which way the wind would take the roof. Hold fast until the beams talk. It is not romantic. It is better. In the morning, I woke, made coffee, and put on the jacket with the deep inside pocket. I reserve for days when I will carry something heavier than keys. I did not know then what would come in that pocket in the weeks ahead. What photographs, what transcripts, what letters from doctors with words that leave no generous interpretation. All I knew was that the line between what I felt and what I could prove was narrowing. I did not call anyone to tell them so. I fixed my hair, I checked the locks, I drove to the office where my name is painted in clean letters on the glass. I answered emails, I smiled at tenants. I signed my own name with a pen that writes smoothly enough to make a person believe for a second that smooth is the same as safe. It is not. But smooth is what lets you move when rough would make you stop. And I had decided calmly, methodically, with the patience of a woman who has replaced her share of Joyce, that I would keep moving until the weight of the truth settled where it belonged. I would not rush the noise. I would measure. I would diagram. I would let other people talk themselves into the corners they had built for themselves. Silence is not the absence of action. In a good house, it is the sound of everything doing its job. Adrian called on a Wednesday at 9:11 a.m., a time that looked deliberate, even if it wasn't. Patterns matured, he said. Proof is catching up. Can I have an up? Bye. He arrived at the carriage house with a messenger bag that had seen rain coffee in airports. We did not waste politeness. He set a thin laptop on the card table and fanned out folders the way a dealer fans cards to remind the table the deck is fair. Tabs in his small handwriting, Boutique River Incidentals timeline. Patterns first, he said, tapping timeline. The page was a spine of dates, Caleb's Austin trip pulled from the itinerary I'd given him. Aubrey's appointments copied faithfully from the pastel calendar beside my office phone. Victor's charges bracketed by timestamps. Between them, Adrian had drawn narrow bridges in pencil window overlap alibi. The pencil marks were tentative, the word alibi already carrying its own question mark. He opened Boutique. 3 stays at the Wren House, he said, naming the small hotel off Broughton that hides its elegance behind a door, so quiet you almost miss it. 2 of them during Caleb's Austin dates, the 3rd in March. He slid a copy of a folio forward. Victor Parks on the room, a line for Miss. Incidentals, a signature that read A. Whitaker in a hand I had watched address thank you notes with shy diligence. Some hotels separate room payment and incidentals to keep bookkeeping neat, Adrian said evenly. Sometimes neat is its own kind of confession. He didn't look at my face. He didn't need to. He moved on. River contained receipts I had already found the low-lit dinner the boutique jewelry store with handwriting that had tried so hard to be helpful it had made itself evidence. I spoke with the store manager as a customer, he said. They remember Victor. The bracelet was boxed with a card, but the card wasn't left with the bracelet. The clerk thinks the buyer put it in his inner pocket before he walked out. Of course he did, I said too softly to sound like anger. He opened Incidentals and turned the screen toward me. Photographs distant and unforced Victor and Aubrey entering the Wren house together by the side entrance, Victor's hand hovering near her elbow with a familiarity that wasn't yet touch. Aubrey glancing over her shoulder not to admire architecture. The dates glowed in the corner of each image. A second set showed them leaving hours later with the careful distance of people who have practiced the choreography of secrecy. Then a scan of a note written on hotel stationery in Aubrey's rounded hand. Just a few more months and the papers move. Then it's ours. No signature. No need. Adrian let me sit with that sentence until the words arranged themselves into steel. He slid one last folder forward unmarked. Inside was a photocopy of a quitclaim deed transferring a Jones Street duplex to Victor Parks, dated in April, signed Elena Marie Parks, in a version of my name that wasn't mine. The notary seal had a commission date small enough to miss and large enough to ruin it had expired 6 months before the signature date. The handwriting that tried to be mine had misjudged the way I cross a T. People think they can imitate a person they only see. They forget how much a name knows the hand that carries it. Where did you get this? I asked. Not because I doubted him, but because chain of custody is not only for courts, it is for minds that won't let themselves be bullied by paper. County records, he said. Filed and then withdrawn 2 days later. Sloppy. Someone realized the notary wouldn't survive scrutiny and tried to make the document disappear. It didn't. Government has its sins, but it still has a talent for keeping ghosts. I called Lila. She arrived with a legal pad and the kind of pen that makes a slight whisper on paper. She studied the deed the way a carpenter studies a bowed board, eyes measuring what won't hold weight. Invalid on its face, she said. And even if a clerk had missed the expiration date, a judge would have laughed it out of the room. She looked at the photographs and didn't sigh because she has trained herself not to reward villains with sound. We could wait for full banking records, she said, but we don't have to. What you have is enough to anchor action if action is what you want. Action can wait until it can make a straight line, I answered. But I am done letting other people set the angle. We planned. Not a confrontation, a framing. Lila would be there not as an enemy combatant, but as the person who keeps a meeting from becoming a rumor. Adrian would come as our records consultant, a phrase bland enough to pass through the kind of man Victor has always been. Saturday afternoon, when people have run out of excuses. The subject line of the invitation email read succession and maintenance planning because lies travel too fast, but plain words are heavy enough to slow a person down. I cooked the kind of food that makes a house smell trustworthy onions beginning in butter tomatoes, collapsing into sweetness, a roast that asked the room to wait. By noon, the living room looked like the memory of a family. The framed photographs on the hallway wall were level again because I had measured them. Victor arrived in a sport coat, cheeks lifted by his own smile, a folder under his arm, like a man returning home with a prize he had snared. "You look well," he said in the tone men use when they're trying to preempt the truth. "I am." I took his coat and did not offer to hang the folder. Aubrey came a few minutes later, carefully lovely, in a dress meant to be admired for its softness. She touched my forearm and called me Mom with the ease of practice. Caleb followed tense around the mouth, the way men get when they are determined to be fair, without yet knowing what fairness will require. Lila sat near the end of the sofa where the light is best for reading. Adrian plugged a laptop into the television with the competence of a person who has made a living out of avoiding theater. I began by telling a version of the truth that could wear company clothes. "I asked Lila to join us," I said, nodding toward her, "because it's time we put into writing some of what we've kept in our heads for too long. If something happened to me or to Caleb, we need to be sure the properties don't suffer from our sentiment." Victor liked that sentence. It tasted like a man being handed a ceremonial key. "Exactly," he said, and stood before anyone asked him to. He opened his folder and removed the quitclaim deed with a flourish that would have made me laugh if laughter were a habit I still permitted myself. "To that end, I've prepared a simple transfer," he said, "to streamline ownership on Jones Street. Purely administrative. It'll give me standing for improvements, repairs, negotiations. The usual." "May I?" Lila asked, her voice polite in the way a measuring tape is polite. Victor handed her the paper and folded his hands as if to receive applause. She read it once, then again quickly, then set it on her knee with care. "This notarization is expired," she said, pointing to the commission date. Her tone had no heat, only temperature, "which makes this document invalid. A filing would fail. A withdrawal won't erase the attempt." She looked up. "There will be no transfer." Victor's smile faltered in a way that exposed how much of it had been appliance rather than expression. "That must be a clerical error," he said smoothly, the way men say clerical when they mean caught. Adrian cleared his throat with the quiet authority of someone who doesn't expect to be allowed the room, but knows he has the right to it. "I'm here," he said mildly, "to help organize records." He clicked a key. The television woke. The first image appeared Victor and Aubrey at the Wren house's side door, timestamp neat in the corner. Another click, a second date. The same door, the same choreography. Aubrey inhaled audibly, a sound like a bead necklace snapping and the beads fleeing across tile. Caleb's head turned toward her as if pulled. He waited. She did not speak. Adrian clicked again. The hotel note filled the screen, Aubrey's handwriting so familiar the room recognized it, even if the eyes refused to. "Just a few more months and the papers move. Then it's ours." "What papers?" Caleb asked, voice quiet enough to make the word ours loud. Aubrey tried tears. "I have never begrudged a woman the defense nature gives her. I only begrudge the use of it against the truth." "I was confused," she said. "I was lonely. Victor, Mr. Parks told me things that made the wrong feel less wrong. I never meant to hurt you." She reached for his hand and failed to find it because it was not where she remembered placing it. Lila opened a folder of her own. "There is also a letter from Dr. Nolan Pierce," she said, not because she wanted to break anyone, but because she is a woman who has learned that sometimes mercy is refusal. It states clinically without story that the gestational age excludes Caleb as the father. Silence arrived, did its work, and took its time leaving. Victor tried to smile again. It looked like a mask lost sight of the face it was meant to fit. "Elena, we've been married a long time," he began, the old voice that had sold neighbors on deals that never arrived. "People make mistakes. You and I." "No," I said, not loudly, simply. "I have found that no has its own volume when you mean it." Caleb stood because there are moments that will not let you sit. He looked at his father and then at the woman he had tried so hard to build a life around. "I have defended both of you." He set his hands open empty. "I have defended you to myself. I wanted belonging so much I mistook proximity for love." He swallowed. "I'm done mistaking." Aubrey tried again, softer, smaller, reaching for a version of herself that might still be forgiven. "Caleb, please. I was so afraid of losing you, I made choices that—" "You lost me by making them," he said, and I watched the line between truth and proof narrow on his face the way it had in my notebook. Lila slid 2 documents across the coffee table. "Elena is filing for divorce," she said, "and a civil action for restitution and conversion. You will be served Victor." She turned to Aubrey without ceremony, which is its own kind of grace. "And given the circumstances, Caleb will be filing to dissolve the marriage. The medical letter will be attached. There will be no claim upon him for a child that is not his." Victor opened his mouth and found nothing in it. Aubrey's tears lost their shape and became breathing. Caleb sank to the edge of the chair as if he had just understood gravity for the first time. I did what women do when the house has been changed by a force it will not pretend was weather. I stood and collected the empty glasses and took them to the kitchen. I rinsed them so the sound of water could give the room permission to move again. When I came back, the paper still sat on the table with the patient arrogance of print. The smell of dinner had cooled from invitation to reminder life is not a sequence of scenes. It is a drawer of tasks waiting for hands. Victor left first. Not with the storming offense he prefers, the room had not given him the stage for it, but with the smallness of a man who has discovered that doors can be closed quietly against him and still be doors. Aubrey rose as if the room would forgive her if she respected its furniture. She paused in front of me. "I meant it," she said, and I knew she meant 100 contradictory things. "When I called you Mom." I know I said because it was a way to end a sentence neither of us had the right to finish. She stepped into the evening, and the evening kept her. Caleb stayed. We did what families do when the language of ceremony fails them. We sat, we breathed, we let the room be a room. After a while I poured him water, and he drank as if water could be proof of anything besides itself. "I don't know how to think yet," he said. "You don't have to," I answered. "You only have to sleep and wake and sign your name where it belongs." He nodded, wiped his face with the heel of his hand, the way he did when skinned knees were the worst the world could manage, and stood. At the doorway he turned back. "You held," he said, as if reporting on a structure after a storm. "You held." After he went, I gathered the folders the way a person gathers the tools she has earned. Adrian packed his bag with the neatness of a man who wants no arguments with future me over where he left anything. Lila squeezed my shoulder, not sympathy, not even solidarity. Assent. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll file, the rest will be work. We're good at work." When they were gone, the house made the sounds houses make when they are not pretending pipes contracting wood, remembering to be wood. The clock insisting that seconds are small and honest. I carried the invalid deed to my desk and slid it into a sleeve marked Exhibit, because naming a thing steals a little of its power. Then I opened my notebook and drew a line down the middle of a fresh page. On the left I wrote "said" and on the right "shown." Under "said" I wrote "clerical error," "mistake," "lonely," "never meant to." Under "shown" I listed hotel folios, incidental signature, photographs, note, expired notarization, doctor's letter. The right side was heavier, good. I closed the book and turned off lamps until the house held only the kind of light a person can carry in her own chest without burning. In the darkness, my father's sentence arrived again. Not like comfort was a far country, but like instruction. Hold fast until the beams talk. Tonight they had. They had said, "This is where the weight truly sits." And now that the house had spoken, I would honor it the only way a builder knows, by letting truth keep its load, and by refusing from this night forward to let lies claim any square footage at all. The filings became dates. The dates became rooms. The first room was a courtroom with its own weather-dry air. Bright lights, the faint smell of old carpet and older stories. Lila sat beside me, a stack of exhibits arranged like shingles. Victor arrived with a lawyer I had never met, and the performance he had rehearsed for years, rueful, charming a man sorry for misunderstandings he had not had time to correct. Judges are carpenters of a sort. They look at frames. Ours read the trust instrument first. He turned pages, found the signature lines, the schedules, the clause that named me sole trustee, and separated marital property from trust assets with the clarity of a chalk line. He did not linger over sentiment. "Mr. Parks," he said at last, voice level, "you cannot claim what you never owned. A gavel is more ceremony than force." The sound still settled like weight on a beam. The civil action for restitution came next. Adrian's photographs, the hotel folios, the incidental signatures, the transfers siphoned from a maintenance reserve line items marching across the screen with the lack of drama that makes a fact unkind. Victor's counsel argued context. Lila replied with arithmetic. The judge entered a judgment for the principal plus interest and costs. He set a payment schedule and added almost gently that the matter of the forged deed and the expired notarization was reserved for referral. Paper can be a witness. Sometimes it is also an informant. Across town on another morning, Caleb sat at a different table with Aubrey, hands folded, jaw quiet. Dr. Pierce's letter lay above the petition like a compass arrow. The court recognized non-paternity and dissolved the marriage. There was no claim to support no custody, to structure no argument to invent about what could not be undone. Aubrey spoke briefly, her voice the thin thread of a person who has run out of fabric. Caleb answered with yes and no, the truest words the law still permits. People imagine relief arrives with trumpets. In truth, it comes like an inspector, unannounced, thorough, and a little cold. Papers stamped and filed, we walked into air that did not yet feel different. In the weeks that followed, difference proved itself with work. I changed how the business breathed. Dual signatures on operating accounts, vendor contracts revised to require written approvals, no more drop-by, and I'll sign. Quarterly internal audits with Britt, reading the ledgers the way a nurse reads vitals. We digitized deeds and leases, stored them in a vault and a mirrored drive, then locked the keys to both in a box with 2 codes, his and mine. I wrote a policy and pinned it above my desk. Clarity is kindness to the future. There were prices, not all of them measured in dollars. Neighbors practiced looking elsewhere in the grocery aisle. At church, a pew shifted once and then always. I do not blame people for wanting their houses to be quiet. I blame them for thinking silence is the same thing as true. I learned to shop early and sit in the last row. I learned that peace, like equity, is built and not granted. Victor moved into a rented room above a hardware store off Waters. The news reached me the way water finds a low place without announcement according to gravity. He sent 2 payments on the schedule, then 1 late one, then a letter about circumstances. Lila sent back a paragraph that felt like a level placed on a sill, measured necessary straight. The payments resumed. Remorse is unreliable, enforcement is not. Aubrey disappeared from the places where my days used to brush hers. No more pastel notes by my office phone. No more searches in the supply cabinet for the good tape. Once, months later, I saw her across a farmer's market, hand on a stroller head, bent toward a baby who belonged to someone else in the legal sense, and yet entirely to her in the way breath claims a chest. She looked up and saw me. We did not wave. It felt like kindness that we did not. The better work came into focus like a room clearing after dust. Caleb and I side by side at a small office downtown with our names painted in clean letters on the door, Parks and Son Property, not because we needed the flourish, but because the truth likes being said aloud. He took operations. I kept structure. He walked roofs. I read agreements. At 5 o'clock, we compared notes, and at 5:30, we went home with a list for tomorrow and no secrets between us. When he faltered as grief teaches a body to do even while it keeps standing, I taught him the trick my father taught me: when your hands don't know what to do, organize a drawer. Months arrived that didn't need their own narrative. Tenants called about real things: a heater that sighed into retirement, a tree that leaned wrong after a storm. Britt caught an overcharge from a plumber. Caleb negotiated it down without becoming a story. I started sleeping through the night. The kettle hissed at proper hours. One afternoon, reading applications for a maintenance position, I found a cover letter from a woman who had aged out of foster care, learned to hang drywall by watching videos, and wanted to build something I can keep. The sentence sat in my chest until it asked for company. That week, I took part of the restitution money and created a small scholarship at Savannah Tech, tuition for students in property maintenance and restoration who could write about steadiness. I named it for my father, who loved a level more than a poem, and for my mother, who kept the porch light on. People sent emails with soft exclamation points. I filed the paperwork with the satisfaction of a hinge that fits. On the anniversary of the day the ultrasound turned the house, I drove out to the Isle of Hope alone, parked under the oaks, and unlocked the carriage house. The yellow paint had faded slightly, the way good things do when weather proves they were honestly chosen. I set the card table, opened the trust binder, and added a page titled Postscript. I wrote in my square hand, structure outlasts charm. Silence is a tool, not a surrender. Ask paper to speak before you ask people to apologize. Hold fast until the beams talk. I closed the binder and stood in the quiet that good houses make, the kind where you hear pipes whisper and wood breathe, and the easy authority of weight where it belongs. The river air carried a salt you can't bottle. I thought of all the rooms we had passed through to reach this one courtroom's offices, kitchens, the long hallway between suspicion and proof. None of them were home. This was home, not the place, but the posture, upright, level sound. That evening, Caleb and I locked the office after balancing the quarter. He turned the sign to closed and grinned the way boys do when the math finally matches the board. We're good at this, he said. We are, I answered, because we don't run on stories. We walked to the truck. The street smelled faintly of rain and brick, and something flowering in a yard I could not see. In the cab, he hesitated. You think it ever stops hurting, he asked. It stops surprising you, I said. That's enough for work. For life, we build other things. He nodded, started the engine, and we drove toward Victory Drive, a name that had become less a boast and more a direction. At home, I set the kettle on, not because I needed the tea, but because routines are beams too. I opened my notebook to a new page, drew a line down the middle, and wrote, kept on one side, lost on the other. Under kept, I listed work, name, son, roof, sleep. Under lost, I wrote only pretense. The page felt accurate. Some nights a house needs music. Some nights it needs the clean click of a lock done right. I turned off the lamps until only the hall light remained a small, steady square on photographs, that now hung true. Outside, the wind moved in the oaks. Inside, the beams held. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.